If you're part of the Tiger Army, look away now. This might be a pretty painful year. While Magpie fans, there's some optimism, but how much can we read into what we watched? And then from a fantasy football perspective, what are the takeaways? What did we learn? What can we observe? And what are the changes we need to make into our side heading into round one? Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I do hope you are enjoying these community series reviews. Every game, we will drop a review giving you a player analysis of the most important guys to look at for your fantasy footy team. As always, we've got to talk through, there's some interesting names that are missing that sit in some potential relevancy spaces. For the Tigers, some first year and first round kids probably really set the scene in Layla and Smiley. Both these guys didn't play. From a Collingwood perspective, you might say Tom Mitchell might sit in that spot, but really it's a Jordan De Goey. These are the guys that are missing that are all still very much in contention for round one. So take of it what you will. Let's go talk about the Tigers. Jaden Short's probably, of all the Richmond players, the one we should take the greatest note in. For a couple of reasons, I thought his game was really important. One, he was taking some kick-ins, which was important. We didn't get to see a lot of them early on. Collingwood just couldn't miss, but he's got that quarterback general sort of ball movement role. Importantly, they were looking to get the ball in his hands when they were trying to square up and get in through the corridor. And when he was running past, they were looking to give him the handball and for him to pick up that handball receive and then use that long penetrating kick by foot real deep into those forward kind of movements for the club. If you're a Jaden Short owner before this match, there's nothing that you should have seen in this game that turned you away from him, because the role is exactly what you'd hoped. Primarily ball mover, primarily they're giving the ball in his hands, whether it be from kick in and or the forward motion through it. And as a result, I think this is one of the more safe, lock it away defensive options. I feel like over the past 2 games at time of recording, there are more to come. Maybe you're watching these a little bit later. I feel like there are 3 defenders that, in my eyes, have kind of picked themselves. Pryor, Reed as Essendon young, kind of cheaper, youthful options in our cash cow territory. And then I think Jaden Short, if you're picking in this mid-range, he's got as good a job security and scoring capacity as anyone, both historically and role. And on that with Jaden Short, the reason they're going to him so often is this Richmond midfield is horribly imbalanced. They've got some really nice ball winners. They've got some good guys that can get the clearance, but they really lack in outside skill and polish. They really do lack in guys, not just at clearance, but then to be second touch on transition, that use the ball well consistently. It is one of the big deficiencies in their list build. I'm sure they'll correct this over the next few years with trade and draft capital that they land, but it's messy. It's yucky. It's not a good look. I suppose the promising part of it is Jaden Short. A lot of the ball's got to funnel through him because he's one of their better ball users. Look, I did have some interest and some moments. Blight and Brown I thought were okay, but they didn't do enough over this match to make me think, yes, I'm bullish to jump on here. So if you're desperate, you can go down that territory, but I just don't think we're going to need to. Tim Taranto's probably the other big Tiger that's worth talking about. A lot of midfield opportunity. There was moments where he did go forward of the ball and sit forward, which wasn't really exactly what we want to look for, but he is such a damaging forward option, and they were short of some options. Really inexperienced team across most of their lines, with the exception of their defensive line. So to me, look, he slowed in the second half. He did get some forward time, but he is pretty clearly their number one ball option in that midfield. He does sit at an interesting price point where some are, for not much difference, looking at a Connor Rozee, who's pretty comparable. For a little bit more, you've got the likes of Dawson and Brayshaw. For a little bit less, you've got, maybe more than a little bit less, but you've got the Days, you've got the Olivers, you've got the Cherras. I do think Tim's in a little bit of no man's land in that space. I do think he's got some value. I think he's probably going to get close to that 103 to 105 kind of range across the formats. That might not be enough given that there are other options around his price point, either identical, a little below or a little above, that I think people just might like more. But he did show that he can score really quite well. And again, he's a much more scorage from stoppage style player that's not as open as maybe he would like it to be. He'd like it a little bit more contested and congested, but these games just never are. So I think if you're on the double T train, you saw what you needed. You know what he's going to be. But if it was you're still on the ledge about him with, him v Rosie or him v a little bit of money saved or him versus a little bit of money on top, it probably wasn't enough to tip you over the edge. But nudging that 105 range, I think is probably in that spot. Look, they had some other guys that were okay. Sonsi looks comfortable, but I'm not sure you'd go there. Ross was the same. Trezise was... These guys are all fine. Gosh, even McIntosh had some unexpected centre-bounce presence. But I'm just not too sure that in these midfield pockets that we're looking for guys and for names, this is someone you should be heading into the territory. So to me, that's not that. The only other guy to talk about is a Toby Nankervis. I know a lot of people are really struggling for ruck options. Pig Mentality and I on the 50 Most Relevant talked about the challenging early run for Tristan Cherry, and so spending up, is that the right approach? I just don't think you can start Rowan Marshall now with him confirmed not to play in this community series. I just can't pick a guy that I haven't seen him play and we know is coming off injury. Gawn is in play, English is in play, but if you are spending up at the top end and you don't want to get burnt, I think Nank's not a bad shout. It'll be interesting to see how they split this role with their other secondary ruck option once a Tom Lynch does come into this team round one. So there's still some movable pieces here. But if you kind of want to have your cake and eat it too with spending at the top end but not getting hurt, Nank is okay. I just don't think there's much value in it. What I will say is this: Collingwood historically, at least last year, were a really hard team to score against. But it did and it does seem to me to be in the games where Mason Cox was the secondary option, more so than Darcy Cameron. So I know some people are looking at both of those kind of guys. If you were in on Nank, you've seen enough. You liked what it was there. He is going to come up against a solo Tom de Koning, which was a pretty good matchup for us last year in round one. So that could be enough to just tip you over the line. So that's my take on the Tigers. But politely, it's going to be a messy year for the Tigers. They are lacking in talent in a lot of lines. Their effort was there, the energy was there, but they're so young and youthful and inexperienced in a bunch of different spots. It was just clear in times when Collingwood decided to put the foot down, they absolutely thrashed them. And then the times where Collingwood were just happy to cruise late in the first, early in the second, that Tigers actually looked all right, but politely, they can only go for a quarter and a half, maybe 2 quarters. To think North Melbourne and West Coast of the last couple of years, where they might be able to hang in on games for a quarter and a bit sometimes, and then they're cooked. Other games, they're done at quarter time. But by the time it gets midway through the third game over, it's headed that way. Scoring against Richmond is going to be very, very favourable. I know, like I said, they're missing a couple of names through there in their first-year players in Lawler, in Smiley. Prestia in time is going to come through there, but none of those guys fix the skill on the outside. Lawler maybe is close, but I feel like he's going to be more developed as a mid-forward type prospect rather than someone that's adding skill through the midfield. The departure of Callum Mills due to injury and him not playing before they return from the bye has opened up another name that was already sitting in our ecosystem of options, but now feels pretty firmly established. Harry Perryman probably should be discussed. You look at his fantasy and SuperCoach score, that might be enough to turn people into or away from him. But in all of these games, we've said this now for a number of years and even this year on the channel, don't get too caught up on the points. Notice how I didn't really mention any of the points of the Tigers. Don't get caught up on points. Get caught up on the role and what is happening and who's missing and what is sustainable and predictable. What was really evident to me, I know De Goey coming into this midfield will change some things up, but Perryman looks like a really critical piece to me. He does 2 things for this Richmond punishment and Collingwood benefit. There's two things he did well. His body work in and around stoppages to protect and to create space for Nick Dacos needs to go back and be re-looked, because Nick got off the chain for three reasons. One, Richmond aren't a great team. Two, Nick Dacos's work rate is unbelievable. But three, the things that Harry would do structurally and positionally to create space for Nick enabled a lot of these touches coming through congestion as a result directly of what Harry was doing. So I think this is a very important piece, not just for Harry's fantasy output, but also for Nick Dacos's fantasy football output as well. I actually am really comfortable with what I saw from Harry Perriman. Why? He scores a lot from stoppage and a lot through tackles. That's where a lot of his points go back. Look through the analysis in this game. It's a lot of tackles in a game. Yeah, he did junk it up late with some easy uncontested possessions and uncontested marks, but in a game that's going to be way more in tight, much more stoppage inducive, and against a much tougher opposition early, these elements, alongside such a heavy centre-bounce presence, actually give me a lot of confidence for Harry Perriman. Now, the good news for this team, for all our Collingwood players, is they've got and are a part of opening round. He drops a 60 or 70 in opening round. Look, that money isn't going to generate as fast, probably not going to make it worth it with the early buy, but we get a look. So any Collingwood player is all contingent on opening round roll and score and what happens around it. But to me, I saw enough about Harry Perriman. I think he can knock on the door of 90 for us from an average, because when the game gets a little tighter, it's not as wide open and free-flowing as A, a Richmond game will be, and B, a normal football game that's much more contested with a little bit more skin in the game, 4 points to win, nothing to really gain in this game outside of miles under the legs, learning a little bit about your team chemistry against an opposition, not much else. So I liked Perriman. If you're keen, you should be really, really keen. I think there's enough there to like. I want to see what it looks like with De Goey in there, but again, opening round's going to give us some of that. Dacos, just a freak. I'm going to hate not owning Nick Dacos at times this year. Unbelievable first two quarters. Just had the ball on a string. His work rate is elite. He gets to so many contests. He uses the ball so well by foot, and he gets into spaces to connect with his team. They love the ball in his hand. And so to me, I really liked what I saw from him. This gave me confidence too, because the game was done at, well, quarter time's a bit unfair, but it was pretty clear at halftime that Collingwood were running away with the game. If indeed he was on managed minutes, he would have sat out from halftime. It was really three-quarter time onwards that he was done for the day. So the fact he's playing so much footy gives me some confidence that plantar fasciitis concern that he had at the start of the year, I think he's a little bit more through it than maybe what some would suggest. So if you want to go at that top end with someone that's unique, someone that's got some ceiling, I'm not too concerned about any early tag games that sit through there. We'll wait and see, of course, to see what eventuates in opening round. But he's got 110 to 115 capacities with him easily in fantasy, and certainly a 120 guy in SuperCoach. If you want something that's more unique than they should, Dacos is the guy. I know some will jump on him because of the points that we see in this game. I'd only be jumping on because you just wanted Dacos for a lot of the preseason, got scared off by the injury. To me, I'm not too concerned. Let's see how he pulls up over the next couple of days. But I'm going to hate not opening if I don't start. The year with Dacos, I'm going to hate every single week. He is so fun to own. Probably two more guys that I think for fantasy are really worth talking about for Collingwood. I know some will be going to go after Lipinski. This game is just perfect for him, right? In the sense of lots of easy uncontested possessions, lots of easy scoring through transition, lots of easy marks, and against a perfect opposition. Like, this is the stack. Just don't get tricked by this. This is mirage territory. Just don't go there. It is not worth it. Please don't fall for that trick. Houston and Dacos, both across halfback. we heard about Josh Dacos sitting in this halfback spot during the preseason. I was a little hesitant to see whether or not it would open up, but it absolutely was there and was the case. Did what he was, absolutely moving the ball with ease and freedom, and was then pushing up the game pretty high. Looking classic, I don't know if you can go there, because I think you've got, despite him having a favourable halfback role, I think you got a couple of things. One, you've got the competition for spots in that price range across the formats anyway, that just makes him a little harder to jump on than what I'd like. So that's one. Then the second element that sits alongside that is he's got two guys that are going to demand so much of the ball, as good as a ball mover and user as Dacos is, that are clinically stronger than Josh, and that is his brother Nick and the new arrival Dan Houston. So I think what he did in this game is fantastic and great and enjoyable, showing that when the game opens up, he's going to score really well. Bump him up in your draft rankings would probably be my suggestion, but from a classic perspective, I just don't think he trumps the other guys that are there, despite better indication that now that defensive status is more heading from a possible to more probable, should this eventuate. And then the last guy I think is worth talking about is a Dan Houston. Look, he started pretty well, kicks a goal, continued on nicely throughout this game. The fact we don't get to see him in opening round does hurt a little bit, as it slows his price movement down, and then the obvious buy that's early. So any gain that others that sit in that spot will kind of lose a little bit. But Houston, you're not targeting because of the money he makes you. You think it's because he's going to sit in that plum distribution ball movement spot that we've seen Port Adelaide gift him, but also that Collingwood under Nick Dacos previously has been really fantasy favourable. I actually really like him, as you're looking for something unique. You're looking for an anchor in your defensive line that's not got an overpay dynamic that's too far about him. I really liked the way he looked in this game. I think if you were keen and bullish on him, I think it's interesting. Classic, I'm not sold it's the right approach, but there was enough that if you were keen, you'd feel really comfortable to go with that selection. For me, it's just how much of this ball is going to get shared around through this team. He is going to get a good line share of it, but if Dacos is back there, that's another decent ball user that's going to get a clip. His brother Nick in the middle, Scott Pendlebury. Like, there's a lot of high quality in this team. Collingwood would and should be rebounding in 2025. I like it. I liked what I saw. Is it enough to put him in classic considerations? For me, he didn't do enough, but he didn't do anything wrong either. So if you're bullish, you should have seen exactly what you wanted to go through there. But were there any other Collingwood players or Richmond players that you feel are worthy of a discussion? If you're watching this episode on YouTube, comment below and let me know who are the Tigers and the Pies that caught your attention and which guys are currently sitting in your starting squad. I'd love to know. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet and turned notifications on, make sure you do so. There's a fresh episode dropping every single day in the preseason, as we are now really just a week away from opening round. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for doing so. If you're listening to the audio podcast, make sure you give us the 5 stars and subscribe. And inside the description of this episode is all the details of where you can get in touch with us and follow and join the conversation on social media. Become a Patreon, gain access to a bunch of additional content and some hidden rewards, and also get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch. They are flying out the doors this preseason. It's guaranteed to make you a better fantasy coach as a result. And it supports the Coaches Panel too. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you again real soon with another review of another one of these AAMI Community Series matches.